Peaceful protests marred as violence erupts. Stores looted and destroyed. Vehicles set on fire. In New York, an officer appearing to pull his gun on demonstrators. In Louisville, a man shot and killed as police broke up a crowd. The chief late today fired. New curfews going into effect tonight with the National Guard activated in 20 states. Also the powerful moment, Floyd's brother visiting the memorial at the scene of that deadly encounter. His powerful message about the violence, and late today, the results of two separate autopsies. What they reveal. President Trump lashing out at the nation's governors, what he told them about dominating the protesters. And could the president use a 213-year-old law to deploy active duty military in American cities? New COVID concerns as protests in the middle of the pandemic. Health experts in one major city urging them to self-quarantine for 14 days. And amid the chaos, the images giving hope to so many tonight.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. The shattered glass from a night of rage has largely been swept up here in New York's Soho neighborhood and communities across the country that were rocked by spasms of looting and violence overnight. Now the ritual of boarding up takes place and bracing for what tonight may bring. An anguished and weary America asking, when will this all end? When will the protests end? When will the police brutality that triggered them end? The virus, the financial ruin that have taken us to the edge, when will they end? Tonight, as an independent autopsy reveals new information about George Floyd's death in police custody, his brother tonight is sending a poignant and powerful message. We're covering it all, starting with Ron Allen. Ron, what's the latest?
Lester, New York's mayor just changed course and ordered a curfew from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning as we gear up for more huge demonstrations for the possibility of more violence. You can see the crowds already gathering in the streets. Police are also gearing up, doubling the number of patrols in parts of the city where there's been trouble.
Across the country, an ominous pattern.
No justice! No peace!
Huge peaceful protests by day demanding justice for George Floyd.
George Floyd!
To those who want to turn this into something that it's not, please stop.
Then, mostly under the cover of darkness, violence erupted, with chaos lasting well into the night. In New York, intense street battles between police and people brazenly targeting some of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. Famous name shops like Chanel destroyed and robbed.
It breaks my heart that there are people undermining what the protesters are doing. It's just wrong.
Residents capturing it all on their cell phones.
This is on this corner. They're all looting Chanel there, just jumping out the window.
Police blame armed, organized criminals using the demonstrations as cover for the violence. Today, NYPD asking the public to help identify at least two suspects in the surveillance video wanted for allegedly firebombing a police vehicle on Friday. While at the same time, NYPD faces growing outrage, accused of using overly aggressive tactics like shoving a protester and driving a vehicle into a crowd. This video appears to show a police officer brandishing a gun at demonstrators. The NYPD says the incident is under internal review.
That officer should have his gun and badge taken away today.
In Louisville, gunfire killed business owner David McAtee during a protest.
He was innocent. He wasn't doing it. I mean, it makes no sense.
Today, authorities said 2 officers and 2 National Guard soldiers returned fire as they dispersed a crowd. The mayor says the 2 officers are on administrative leave because their body cameras were not activated in violation of policy. It's unclear who fired the fatal shot. The police chief relieved of duty. The protest originally over the police shooting of Breonna Taylor last March. Her mother today.
This is so much bigger than her, but we can't get justice with violence. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't help.
In Oklahoma, at least 3 people were hurt after a truck drove into a crowd of protesters on an interstate. In Boston, where thousands of demonstrators converged on the state capitol, police say they were attacked by a barrage of bricks and bottles. Fire exploding on the Boston Common. This fashionable shopping district set to reopen this morning after months shut down because of COVID-19, cleaning up after the mayhem. Ron Allen, NBC News, New York.
I'm Miguel Almaguer. From Colorado to California, nearly every protest started peaceful until unrest erupted into chaos. With stores looted, businesses torched, and violent arrests made.
You don't need to put her down like that!
4 days of chaos are on the verge of another night of mayhem. In Santa Monica, the famed 3rd Street Promenade overrun by a mob. Police making dozens of arrests while squaring off with crowds along the iconic pier.
They hijacked our protest. I don't even think they know what they're protesting. They just wanted a reason to break windows.
As some peacefully protested, others provoked confrontation.
Heads up, heads up, heads up!
Officers firing tear gas and projectiles into crowds.
Police here are now pushing forward. They're moving all of these protesters back because the situation here is unraveling.
In Los Angeles, a state of emergency as buildings were torched again. From Beverly Hills to Long Beach, millions in damage.
It's overwhelming. Hurt.
Mark Robles, comforted by the National Guard, says small businesses pay the biggest price.
I saw it all unfold last night on the news, but being here, seeing it in person, this is horrible.
With banks burned and roads blocked, in San Diego, City Hall and a shopping district was trashed. Across the country, it was often demonstrators trying to stop agitators from destroying so many American cities.
This is unnecessary. This doesn't send a message. It doesn't say let's get socially involved.
As the National Guard deploys, 20 California cities are under siege. At this DMV in San Bernardino, a man with a makeshift blowtorch tried to burn down the building that serves the public. Thousands of arrests now made, while in Seattle, anarchy was in the streets after mobs were on the move.
Here in the Seattle area, it's been tension and heartbreak night after night, looting and protest. Now the community coming together, racing for what could be next.
With protesters demanding justice, there is growing worry their peaceful demonstrations are overshadowed by outside outbursts of violence. Tonight, a fight for their message and one for the streets.
Protests like this continue to play out across Southern California. For the most part, they have been very peaceful. But I can tell you, Lester, not far away from here, police are standing by. They're at the ready. They're also with the National Guard. A curfew is set to go into place soon. But, Lester, it is still very early in what could be a very long night ahead. Lester?
All right, Miguel Almaguer in Los Angeles, thanks. As we look now over a tense Soho here in New York, we want to turn to Minneapolis and an appeal to end the violence from a brother of George Floyd who visited the site of his death as results of an independent autopsy were released. Here's Gabe Gutierrez.
Today, Terrence Floyd was overwhelmed, his steps heavy with grief as he saw for the first time the ground where his brother took his last breath.
My family is a peaceful family. My family is God-fearing. Yeah, we upset. But we're not going to take it.
It was exactly a week ago that George Floyd died after a Minneapolis police officer knelt on his neck for almost 9 minutes. His death now at the heart of the nation's unrest. His youngest brother is calling for an end to the violence.
Y'all right. Let's do this another way. Let's stop thinking that our voice don't matter. That's right. And vote.
Late today, the Hennepin County medical examiner released Floyd's autopsy, determining his death was a homicide caused by cardiopulmonary arrest while he was restrained by the officers. Hours earlier, Floyd's family released its own independent autopsy. It found the manner of death was homicide caused by asphyxia due to a neck and back compression that led to a lack of blood flow to the brain.
The autopsy shows that Mr. Floyd had no underlying medical problem that caused or contributed to his death.
A new NBC News analysis of police records found that since 2015, Minneapolis officers have used so-called neck restraints, using an arm or leg to compress someone's neck, more than 200 times. In at least 44 of those cases, the suspects or other individuals lost consciousness. Several police experts say that number appears to be unusually high. That history is part of what's fueled the anger and pain.
These buildings could be rebuilt. Lives cannot be brought back once they are taken.
On the sixth night of protests here following Floyd's death, police surrounded large crowds, making almost 300 arrests. It was largely calm. Except for this shocking scene, a semi driving into a huge crowd of peaceful protesters. The driver arrested. Incredibly, no one seriously injured.
I think the incident just underscores still the volatile situation we have out there.
What's his name? George Floyd! What's his name? George Floyd!
Tonight, his family hopes that name is a call to action, not destruction. A public memorial is now scheduled here in Minneapolis on Thursday, and others later in North Carolina, where he was born, and Houston, where he grew up. Lester?
Kay Gutierrez tonight, thank you. As we've seen, the protests and violence have come within blocks of the White House, and today President Trump told the country's governors they should take a much tougher approach to keeping order. Jeff Bennett is at the White House tonight.
As protesters surround the White House, the sounds of flashbangs heard in the back of it happening in the shadow of the White House. Multiple sources tell NBC News that some of the president's closest allies are urging him to strike a more unifying tone. His advisors divided over the proper response. Meantime, Joe Biden today held his first in-person campaign event in over 2 months. The apparent Democratic presidential nominee met with community leaders at a predominantly black church in his hometown.
The Band-Aid has been ripped off by this pandemic and this president.
And tonight, President Trump left the White House to visit St. John's Church, part of which was set ablaze during the protests. That was after police cleared a large group of peaceful protesters in the area with rubber bullets and flashbangs. Lester?
Jeff Bennett at the White House. Jeff, thank you. In 60 seconds, a deeper look at just who these protesters are and what makes this moment so explosive. And the crisis on top of a pandemic, the urgent new warnings about the spread of coronavirus. The protests we're witnessing tonight may have been sparked by the death of George Floyd, but the anger driving them goes much back further. Here's Blaine Alexander.
We have been here before.
Each generation has had to deal with it.
It's just a continuous cycle of hurt and killing and senseless violence.
Protesters taking to the same streets, signs with the same words, chants echoing the same message. The only difference, the names. Each time, that same hope for progress is followed by yet another death.
How many of you have protested this before in some form? So all of you all have been out protesting police brutality in some form before.
I'm tired. I have to protest my right to not be killed.
It's that feeling of frustration, of desperation, driving so many to try yet again to be heard.
It feels different.
Brittany Packnett helped organize rallies in Ferguson 6 years ago.
Certainly there is a frustration and a despair and an exhaustion that is very familiar, but also there is more understanding that people have to be actively anti-racist in their everyday lives.
But just like then, calm is turning to chaos. President Trump and his attorney general say the violence is fueled by Antifa, a militant anti-fascist movement, but have not provided any proof of that. Local officials say they believe some anarchists and other extreme groups are directing looting and violence. In an essay published today, former President Obama writes, "We should not excuse violence or rationalize it or participate in it." He says the focus should be on both protest and politics, adding reforms to police departments and the criminal justice system often happen at state and local levels. This video from Charlotte, viewed millions of times, captures a raw pain spanning generations.
What you see right now is going to happen 10 years from now. So what I need y'all to do right now at 16 is come up with a better way. He angry at 46. I'm angry at 31. You angry at 16.
And so that is why they march.
We're trying to teach our kids that, yes, you can have a voice. You can stand for what's right.
With the hope that this time, finally, can be the last. Blaine Alexander, NBC News, Atlanta.
There are growing concerns tonight about these crowds protesting during this ongoing pandemic and a potential spike in cases. Here's Sam Brock with that.
Massive crowds swarming cities across the country are choosing social justice over social distancing.
I could be dead tomorrow if I walk on the streets.
But an urgent health warning from officials.